Hello and welcome to the Waza YouTube channel. I'm Rosa Pons, Head of Communications at Waza, and today I'm honored to be joined by Mr. Lee Emke, who recently retired as President and CEO of the Houston Zoo after nearly a decade of transformative leadership. Lee's career in the zoo and aquarium community spans 36 years, including leadership roles at Minnesota Zoo, Houston Zoo, and Waza, the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Over those decades, he has shaped some of the most innovative exhibits in our field and championed conservation, education, and collaboration worldwide. Lee, thank you for joining us today.
Wonderful to be with you.
Thank you. To begin, how would you introduce yourself in your own words?
I am a lifelong animal lover and conservationist who has had the great luck, the great fortune to be involved in some of the most progressive zoos in the world, as well as in Waza, a career that kind of took me by surprise, but has been very fulfilling and will continue even past my retirement as a zoo CEO.
Amazing. You've actually dedicated 36 years to the zoo profession, leading two major US zoos and influencing also the direction of our global community as former WASA president during 2014 and 2015. Looking back, what first drew you from law into the world of zoos?
I actually was drawn into law with an interest in the environment and protecting the environment. So I was actually an environmental lawyer for a number of years. But that was preceded by an interest in animals and zoos from as early as I can remember in my life. My very first memory of in life was as a 3-year-old visiting a zoo in Fresno, California, and seeing a white rhino and having feeling amazed by that, and really have loved animals and have been interested in zoos ever since that time. The change actually came when I realized that zoos, this was in the mid 80s, that zoos were really evolving into proactive conservation organizations, and that was actually being manifested through exhibit design, creating habitats for animals that both mirrored their natural environments and brought people into those environments as sort of a implicit teaching opportunity. And I saw that as a really important and interesting direction that really appealed to me. So I went back and studied landscape architecture at UC Berkeley to become an exhibit designer in zoos, which when I think about it in hindsight was a kind of a leap of faith, because there are only a very few number of individuals and institutions doing exhibit design. But it worked wonderfully for me, as I was actually hired almost immediately out of graduate school to go work at the Bronx Zoo, the Wildlife Conservation Society, which at that time was truly in a period of a Renaissance period, when it was transitioning from being the New York Zoological Society to the Wildlife Conservation Society with a true global outlook on conservation, and was engaged in building some of the most creative and innovative exhibits ever done. It was a very short legal career, and it's been a very long career in zoos, but I think the two actually fit together surprisingly well.
Yeah, I mean, exhibit design has been a very important part of your career. During your time at Minnesota Zoo, you actually helped shape iconic exhibits such as the award-winning Grizzly Coast. What did those early successes teach you about combining great storytelling, animal welfare, and guest experience?
Well, sure. And I would actually go back to my work at the Bronx Zoo, which was truly formative in that regard, and specifically with an exhibit called the Congo Gorilla Forest, which is now 25 plus years old, that I think still stands as probably one of the truly most innovative and outstanding zoo exhibits ever created, because it was, in addition to creating beautiful naturalistic spaces for animals and immersing people in that environment, also was perhaps one of the very first conservation-focused exhibits in a zoo anywhere, where guests were learning about the conservation programs of the Wildlife Conservation Society as they traversed the exhibit, and actually designated their admission fee to that exhibit to specific conservation programs in nature. And over time, the Congo gorilla forest has generated well over $10 million, which has gone directly to Central African wildlife conservation. And I think, again, stands out today as one of the most exciting and innovative and well-regarded animal exhibits in the world. That was a model that I brought with me to Minnesota and developed a number of exhibits there that, again, told stories about conservation woven into the narrative as you went through the exhibit. And most specifically, one called Russia's Grizzly Coast, which, if you don't know, Minnesota is in a relatively quite cool environment most of the time and is on the 45th parallel on Earth, which is, if you cross the globe, you'll actually hit the Kamchatka Peninsula of Russia, which has some incredible wildlife that was very under represented and not something many people were aware of. So creating an exhibit about that part of the world and the wildlife that lives there, I think was, number one, it was unique. And number two, it was meaningful and made sense from an animal welfare perspective. The animals are all well adapted to the climate of Minnesota. And I think really represents a journey to another part of the world, and the conservation challenges of that part of the world that remain unique. I don't think anyone else has done an exhibit about wildlife in the Russian Far East anywhere, certainly in the United States, and perhaps not even in Europe. So obviously thinking about how do you create a choreography of experience for guests so that they're moving, feeling like they're immersed in the environment and feeling, kind of removed from the place that you're actually in, which is near Minneapolis, Minnesota, and taking you to another part of the world through creative landscape design. But that landscape extends obviously into the animal habitats, creating great spaces for the animals to behave naturally, whether they're sea otters in deep seawater habitats with opportunities to forage for shellfish, or grizzly bears living in an environment where they can also fish for living fish in a pond or find shelters in caves that are also close to the public. So it's really that marrying great animal welfare, well-being, giving them choice and opportunity, but also trying to assure that the guests are getting great views of animals up close and seeing them in their very best light. So that's been, again, the model has been developed at a number of zoos, but I think both the Congo gorilla forest and Russia's Grizzly Coast took that model, the concept of landscape immersion, to a very high degree and continue to be very successful years after opening.
Definitely, that's a really good example. You joined Houston Zoo 10 years ago, and you've been leading the zoo for nearly a decade. You also set in motion there quite a bold redevelopment plan. Which achievements from that era are you most proud of, and why?
To me, the greatest opportunity at the Houston Zoo was a complete reinvention of its mission and again, the physical reality that manifests that mission. We went from being a zoo that did conservation as a sideline to being a conservation organization that operates a zoological institution. We did put together a master plan for the zoo that changed it from kind of the traditional taxonomic layout of most zoos to one that focuses on regions of the world where the Houston Zoo had partnerships for wildlife conservation and using that as the storyline for the exhibits. So we've been able to transform, again, a fairly traditional zoo into one that takes people on small journeys to different parts of the world and tells the stories of the conservationists and the local communities who are doing their work to try to preserve those areas. Most specifically, we started locally with a story about Texas and the Texas wetlands that are a really critical environment for a number of endangered species, and told the story of how, because people cared enough, some of those endangered species are now rebounding and coming back. I think it's important that there are stories of hope that are part of zoo exhibits. It can't just be about all of the doom and gloom and the things that are going poorly in the world, which there are many opportunities to tell that story. But we think in order to engage guests, there also needs to be positivity and hope. And the fact that in Texas, the whooping crane, the American alligator, and the American bald eagle have all rebounded from the brink of extinction and are coming back, it provides exactly that story of hope using some very beautiful and charismatic animals to help tell the story. We then moved into another major wetland habitat in the world that people are not super familiar with, but is one of the great wildlife habitats on Earth, which is South America's Pantanal. And that was an exhibit that opened in 2020 and featured the complete diversity of wildlife that one might find in that part of the world, from small poison dart frogs all the way up to large animals like jaguars and tapirs. And again, was based around the stories of conservationists living in Brazil who the Houston Zoo had been supporting for many years, working with the communities there to find ways to protect the habitat and the animals, but all doing it, and again, in an immersive, beautiful habitat experience for people. That was followed by the largest exhibit of the capital campaign and the kind of the cornerstone of the whole master plan, featuring the Galapagos Islands. Again, a place the Houston Zoo had a long history of supporting conservation, but it's a place that is rarely featured in zoo exhibits, primarily because the animals in the Galapagos Islands are strictly protected and there are generally no Galapagos species represented in zoos, with the very big exception of the giant tortoise. And the zoo, again, had a long history with giant tortoises that have been breeding in U.S. zoos for well over a century now. So we were able to develop an exhibit that featured one Galapagos species, the Galapagos tortoise, but also a number of stand-in species that represent animals that one might find in the Galapagos, but also create a lot of visitor interest and engagement. Notably sea lions, Humboldt penguins, and Caribbean iguanas, all essentially acting as stand-ins for their Galapagonian counterparts. And again, creating very choreographed experiences. So you move from one habitat to another in a seamless way, seeing animals above water, below water, on a rocky volcanic hillside, and on beaches and in deep water, all of which create a very memorable experience that relates directly back to the conservation work Houston Zoo is supporting in the Galapagos, and a kind of a global issue that's impacting especially oceanic and island environments, ocean plastics, and really building a whole messaging around the issue of plastic waste and its impact on the world, and what individuals who are visiting the zoo can do in their own lives to actually mitigate that problem. I think one of the things we've tried to do in all the exhibits is find ways for guests to the zoo to directly do something positive to help, directly or indirectly, I guess, the animals that they're seeing in those exhibits, whether it's mostly behavior change around consumption patterns. But I think that this one has worked quite well with the direct tie between the oceanic wildlife of the Galapagos Islands and the use of plastics in our daily lives here in the United States. All three of the exhibits I just mentioned were named as the best new exhibit of the year by the AZA, which does an annual contest. And so I think the fact that they're both great for the animals, beautiful and wonderful experiences for our guests, and have demonstrated that the learning goals that we set out for each of them are working, has been a testament to the planning process and to the amazing team of people that we've had developing the exhibits at the Houston Zoo.
That's amazing. And those are actually very good exhibit examples. You clearly are passionate about exhibit design and conservation. And I also know you've been a passionate advocate for international collaboration during, your tenure as WASA president. In your view, what role do global partnerships play in addressing challenges like biodiversity loss or climate change?
Well, they're absolutely essential because obviously these things are all connected, and to try to deal with it as an individual zoo or as an individual country is very limiting. So partnerships and collaboration at the global level for these globally impactful issues is essential. And it's great that I think WASA has always, and even increasingly, has served as a convener, bringing together zoos from very different parts of the world, all centered around those global issues of biodiversity loss, climate change, et cetera. So it was a huge honor and a privilege to be able to serve as WASA president for 2 years and to preside over a period when work that had been underway for a while but was actually completed while I was president, which is the development of strategies to look both at the conservation role of zoos and the animal welfare within zoos, knowing that those are really the bookends that that are the most critical for all of the institutions in Waza and zoos and aquariums around the world. So completing those strategies was probably the the top achievement during my time as president, but my time on council was quite a bit longer. And to see the animal welfare goal being adopted and formulated was also really something that has global impact and there was a global need and a global impact by developing that goal.
And what did being part of such a global zoo and aquarium community was mean to you personally?
I think of all of the activities I've had as a member of the zoo and aquarium community, being in Waza has been the most impactful. Mainly, it's about learning from others and learning from other regions. We are often in the US, there's a sense that we can go it alone. American exceptionalism is something that has unfortunately been taken to a pretty high degree recently, but there is so much to learn from all of the regions of the world. And to beyond that was the friendships and the relationships and the networking that happens at the Waza level truly informed all of my work over the years and made it a much richer and much more informed career.
Definitely. And I guess you also witnessed enormous change during your tenure, but also, in the last 3, 4 decades. What do you think zoos and aquariums should focus on to stay relevant, trusted, and effective in conservation for the next generation?
Well, certainly before they can be effective in conservation, they have to be seen as great custodians and caretakers of the animals in their care. I think Dr. Jenny Gray put it best that the social license that allows zoos to operate is animal welfare, animal well-being. That if you don't demonstrate that to the people in your community, any conservation messaging that you're trying to impart will probably fall on deaf ears. So it really, again, mentioned the idea of bookends, that animal welfare, animal well-being is sort of a baseline that needs to exist in order to be an effective conveyor of conservation messaging and direct conservation. So the thing that has changed is that realization. I think people in the zoo community now understand that you will not be effective in conservation if the animals in your care are not very well cared for and perceived of as very well cared for by the communities that you're in. So that means a lot of things. It means having fewer species, more individuals of fewer species, having larger habitats, having more staff focused on the well-being of those animals. So that has really changed what used to be kind of the operating model for zoos to where we are going today. Much more focused, much more individual animal focused, but also sort of the broader focus on creating messaging for guests about big issues like biodiversity loss and climate change, making sure that there is a direct impact on wild populations through your work, whether that's financial assistance or technical assistance, that it can't just be work at the zoo. It needs to be work that reaches out to the habitats and wildlife that you're exhibiting should be taken care of in the wild as well through the resources that are available to each zoo.
That's right. That's really good advice for, emerging leaders who at the end, as you said, must balance animal welfare, innovation in exhibit design, and also deep measurable conservation impact, right? So I think that was definitely on point and a great advice for emerging leaders. Leadership can be challenging, but also rewarding in equal measure. What moment from your career have stayed with you as defining or somewhat transformative?
Well, I think coming to the Houston Zoo and having the opportunity to take an organization that was teetering on the brink of becoming a conservation organization, but not fully embracing it yet, both at the level of the board, the staff, and the community. I think conservation was often viewed as something good to do. If the zoo is financially successful, then we can do conservation work. And transforming that into a realization that first and foremost, we need to be doing conservation, that every activity of the zoo needs to circle back and support in some way or another the conservation of animals in nature. So I think that culture change is something that, again, I think the zoo was ripe for it, but it needed the the catalyst of the strategic plan that we put together and the master plan. And I think in the end, after 10 years, I can say it was fully embraced by all the stakeholders at the zoo. And as a result, Houston Zoo has become one of the global leaders in that idea of a zoo-based conservation organization.
Yeah, I definitely agree. We need to do conservation. That's really a key message. I would like to finish with two quick fire questions, short answers only. If you hadn't led zoos, what profession would you have chosen instead?
Well, because I did have a previous profession, I probably would have stayed with my environmental law practice, which was, again, in the 80s when I became a lawyer, there was a whole new field emerging of environmental law in the United States and now globally. And that was fascinating to me. And it was something that I probably would have pursued for a longer time than I did if zoos were not part of the picture.
And your favorite animal and why?
I love rhinos, and most specifically, the Sumatran rhino. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. Rhinos in general are just, as I said, when I was 3 years old, it was my first memory was to see a rhino. And they're just so impressively big and prehistoric and just I love them. But the Sumatran rhino in particular is one that I'm very close to because it's the smallest of the rhinos. Many of them actually have red hair. And I became acquainted with an individual rhino who was part of, unfortunately, an unsuccessful program to bring Sumatran rhinos into zoos for breeding because they're so critically endangered in Southeast Asia. But one of the animals that was brought to the Bronx Zoo was named Rapunzel because of her long red hair. And they're the smallest of the rhinos. They're very vocal. They have a variety of sounds. They're incredibly docile and wonderful to be around. And that animal just left a very, very strong impression on me. It's also, a sad story that this is a species that may go extinct in our lifetime, although there is still some positive work that's happening in Indonesia right now to develop an in situ breeding program for potential restoration of the population. But they are just such a unique animal and so poorly known and so beautiful that I would have to say the Sumatran rhino is my favorite animal. And Rapunzel in particular, she left a place in my heart.
Well, that's a lovely name, and I really hope that that program can bring some hope into this. Thank you for sharing your journey and reflections with us today, and also for your decades of leadership that really have helped shape our global zoo and aquarium community. For everyone watching, don't forget to subscribe to the Waza channel for more conservations with conservation leaders. Lee, is there a final message you'd like to share with the global zoo and aquarium community of Waza?
Number one, you inspire me. All of the people working in zoos. Again, I mentioned the idea that we're all coming at it from different perspectives and different languages and cultures, but there's a common goal. And I find that extremely inspiring and obviously lots of work ahead. This community gives me hope because to see people who care so much, so deeply, and are so dedicated to the cause, I feel like in the end, we are going to find some victories in a world where there's a lot of challenges.
Definitely. Thank you again, Lee, and thank you all for watching. See you next time on the Waza channel. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you.